What's up, guys? We are here at the first ever, Chris.
Woo.
First time ever.
Let's go.
Unmasked podcast, and this is an open discussion about men's mental health. My name's Gordon.
My name's Chris.
And the whole reason we're doing this is because November is Men's Mental Health Month. And if you would have told me that 2 years ago, I would have had no idea what that was or what that meant. But hopefully this podcast gets out before November. If not, right now it's November, right?
Yeah, we're going to make it. We're getting it done.
Yeah, it's towards the end of November, so it's still November. So, hey, so today, Chris and I are going to come to you not as mental health professionals, not as experts in the field. And so we just want to get that out in the open, that we are not mental health professionals, that we are two individuals through life experiences are here to share some things that we've learned, some things that we've been through, and what we feel can help other men go through life. And we wanted to do that, especially for men's mental health, because we feel strongly that, that's something that is not really talked about very much, right?
No, not really. And I think to me, most men I look at in my life really go through life just chipping away day after day and expressing their emotions, expressing their grief and loss in ways that are not beneficial to them and those around them. Or if they don't express those, they just shut down. And I think by being here and talking about it today that we can hopefully shed a new light on what men go through and hopefully find positive ways to deal with it.
That's a good word. Yeah, I think that's really what it is, right? We want to bring awareness to this. And when we say awareness, meaning that we're not here to solve problems. We're not going to solve the epidemic of men who are struggling with depression and anxiety and why suicide rates among men are so high. Mm-hmm. We're here today as just two individuals who feel burdened for this, and two individuals who know that through our own authenticity, vulnerability, and transparency, mm-hmm. that we can help reach men. And so we want to give you guys just a little bit of background of our why. And so I'll kind of tell you my why. So probably in the last 3 months, I've had more men reach out to me via social media, phone, whatever and tell me how lonely they are and tell me how depressed they are. And, that's not something that as men we're going to talk about and glorify over social media. That's I think something that as men we really even struggle to say to one another. And so, I had a couple in 1 week hit me and I just kind of kept it into myself, talked to them, and then I had a couple more, and even recently, as early as last week, a man reached out to me. He's a father and he's a business owner and highly successful. And he's just man, I'm the loneliest I've ever been. And so this idea started coming to me. And Chris, you had did a podcast. I was like, what? I think I want to touch on some things. Absolutely.
And that's where this came from for me. I was doing the SVL podcast talking about ways that we live up to the mission statement at the gym and how to bring out the best in everybody that comes through the gym. And one of my the question posed to me is what have you done to allow this to happen? And for me, it was simply that I went to counseling just before that, and that I genuinely believe that counseling allows me to be the best person I can be for those around me by dealing with issues that I feel inside of me, or dealing with grief, dealing with trauma, and that allows me to be the person I'm meant to be for the people around me.
And so when Chris came to me and I kind of said, man, I feel burdened, and that's a word I'm going to use a lot today. Burden is it's a word I'm feeling. And he was like, I've got this idea. Let's just go reshoot this SVL podcast. I wanted to say X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And I was just I don't know if the SVL podcast is the best place. Side note, we have a podcast for the gym called SVL Strong. Mm-hmm. You should go check it out.
Yeah, highly recommend.
But I said, I just kept thinking about it. And I said, I don't know how we're going to do this, Chris, but I just know that there's some things that we feel burdened for and that the Lord's kind of put in our heart. And so, big shout out to Jen Blair, how amazing she is at Prong Studios for getting us in here. Also, you too, Will. I don't know what you do, but thank you. And so really today is just a way to kind of share some things. And so when I thought about this, who is this for? So obviously this is geared towards men. However, I don't want spouses, supporters of men, girlfriends, family to just shut off because this is geared towards an open discussion on men's mental health. I actually posted some questions on Instagram we're going to get to later. And I had a lot of women who reached out to me who were just like, hey, tell me how I can support my spouse during rough times of if they're dealing with depression or mental health. And I said, man, what a great mindset to have. And so really this is for anyone who is a man who may be struggling, or even if you're not struggling, even if you're dude, everything is great. And I think we all can be honest with one another that in life there's valleys and in life there's highs. And so there may be a time where you get to struggle and you listen to this. And so real quick, Andrew Huberman, Chris, you know who Andrew Huberman is?
Absolutely. Big neuroscience guy, big brain guy.
Dude, big brain guy, jacked, tons of muscles, tattoos. Awesome. Automatically cool in our books. So he actually recently did an interview. And in the interview, he actually talked about his relationship with God, which to me is fascinating because he is a big neuroscience guy. And I think there could be a correlation at times where you take people who may be on that side of science and this side of faith, and they may not, jive together very well.
For sure.
And one thing Andrew Huberman said that I just completely resonated with, he said, my whole life I've been burdened with wanting to learn and share this information I'm learning. And it wasn't until later in life that I learned that burden, he believes, was from the Lord. And so as we talk about what we're talking about today and we go through this, I can't help but think, for me personally, part of me is always been burdened for men to reach to the point in life where I think they're reaching their potential, right? And to draw out the best in men. And so as we get into these conversations, really feeling drawn from my own self of being hey, the Lord's put this burden on my heart. I want to talk about it and kind of where you're at with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look at both of us and I look at, in each of our own ways, leaders. And for you, from being an entrepreneur to your position in CrossFit, to owning a gym, that you are a leader of men and you're an influential person. And for me, coming from a military background and being a commander, is that you look at the people around you. And for me, I look at the people in my formation. You look at the people within your gym and you see their struggles. And leadership isn't, to me, simply about saying, hey, you go here, you do this. It's learning people, learning what makes them tick, and caring about them, and also loving on them. To me, I don't know how one can be an effective leader if you don't care about the people that you lead.
What a great analogy too, right? That leadership is not about you or about the status that you're in, but how you're bringing people up. I know that's one thing you and I have always been passionate about, is bringing people up in life. And so we're just going to talk about a little bit where this started from. So I'll just touch briefly. So probably about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year, maybe a year and a half ago, I wasn't too familiar with mental health or even men's mental health. And I had a correlation of mental health that it was on this other end of the spectrum that you're in an institute or you're struggling with certain diseases, and that is solely mental health. And it wasn't until I had some really good friends last November who, they just came and kidnapped me one day. And I thought that was the best thing ever that they kidnapped me because they never told me where we were going. They just said, hey, I need you to show up here.
Heck yeah.
And if you know me, I like control, and I freak out when I don't have control. I'm working on it, okay? And they just kidnapped me. And the cool thing was they told me, they said, hey, we noticed that you haven't been okay. And so rather than sit me down and lecture me, they just chose to take me to go shoot some guns, America, and eat some good food and just hang out. And I left there just feeling so fulfilled. And I was like, man, that's it. They recognized some things in me weren't the best, and it was 100% my mental health. And they brought that to brought that to the forefront of me, which I never thought it would be that, because I carried a lot of shame with even saying mental health and men and what we're struggling with. I carried shame in that, which is such a lie. And then that's when I kind of realized, maybe I should pay attention to more of how I'm feeling in the seasons that I'm in. And so that's really kind of cued me the last, year and a half to being like more in tune with that and talking with other men and trying to get rid of this stigma where it says that like, hey, you may be in a season where you're struggling with anxiety or like, man, even depression, but like trying to get it through them. Like, hey, this isn't like this scarlet letter that you're going to wear and everyone's just going to throw you out. So kind of your experience with this.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of men, their first interaction with mental health is that in times of crisis or times that life changes and unexpectedly. And for me, that growing up, that one of kind of the shaping memories of my life is that my parents' marriage ending and just completely flipping my life upside down at 10 years old. And going forward, being raised by a single mom, that it meant a lot, built a very strong bond with my mother. Kind of watched her grow up as I grew up and lived through a lot of hard times. And, you know, but ultimately, like, hey, she did a good job, raised me, got me to college. I graduated college. And then in 2016, she was in a car wreck in late 2015. And while they're looking at the damage done to her body by the seatbelt, they find a lump in her chest, on her chest wall. And it turns out she had breast cancer. And it began a really long process for her of battling cancer. And I think to me at the time that I wasn't, I don't want to say naive to breast cancer, but I always assumed that breast cancer was survivable. Never imagined that at any point during this process that my mom would pass away. And that in 2017, I get back from BOLIC, which is kind of the officer equivalent of basic training in the Army. And she's cleared in early 2017 and everything's good. And then me and her kind of had a falling out in May, more from the sense that I was kind of a failure to launch out of college. As weird as, or I shouldn't say as weird, it's just the reality of college. And I moved out and I wanted to carve my own path and had a big falling out in May with me moving out. And then in June, it turned out like her breast cancer became metastatic and it spread throughout her body. And it was kind of at that time, pretty quickly realized that, hey, this is stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. This is the survival. There's a 0% chance of survival from this, that it's going to be like, this is 100% going to be what, percentages. This is going to be what kills you. But the doctor's prognosis was, hey, like you have 2 years to live. And I'm like, okay, we got 2 years. And that December I was deploying, mobilizing with the National Guard to go up to D.C. And do my mission.
We probably forgot to say that you were in the military, didn't we?
Well, I probably said something about it.
Yeah.
The hat, I mean.
He's in the military, by the way, guys, if you couldn't tell.
No, not at all. And so I in my head, I'm like, hey, like I got a chance to mobilize, do my job, do my military job, hopefully make something of myself there. And I have at least 6 months. I don't want to say to make things right, but I have time. And I think to me was always in my head that I have time to whether it makes things right and not everything's going to be fine, but that the relationship will be strong. And then just in that 6-month process, my mom was just so beat up from chemo and radiation that getting steady chemo just became physically impossible for her, just because how aggressive her original chemotherapy regimen was. And in late November, early December, I'm doing kind of one of my last big exercises before I mobilize, go to Texas and mobilize. And I can't get hold of my mom. And then finally my aunt calls me and it's like, hey, like this is it. And I was in Colombia at the time, came back home, and within a few days, my mom ended up passing away. And just leading up to everything and what I was about to do, that I essentially had 16 days between when my mom died and that I was going out the door to go to Texas. And you know, I think being young at the time or trying to play the stoic, that I was just like, hey, everything's good to go, that I don't have there's no reason for me to stay behind. I'm good. Like, this is where I want to be.
How old were you at the time?
I was 24 at the time. And I think like the thing about you, and I think a common theme with men's mental health is that you play the stoic, and not only do you play the stoic, but I think other men believe you when you say
That's good.
a certain thing, and that and if you say something enough, like people will believe you. And I think the thing about grief is that grief isn't something that just comes to you for a certain period of time. I know like we like to have like a grieving process or a bereavement, take bereavement leave, and that I think my experience with grief is that it's one of the most insidious things that exists within this world, because it doesn't take the form of one thing. It feels like it takes the form of a lot of things. And by the time I think I really had a chance to know what happened, I was in D.C. for about 3 months. And I was completely separated from my support group at home. And just the nature of kind of just the way things were working up there, it was like I found myself on my own dealing with it, and I did not handle it well at all. And and it was just a very, very dark period of my life. And so much so is that I remember, so the Army does periodic health assessments and like surveys. And like the surveys are kind of hilarious because I don't know where this starts in the Army, but people,
are you okay?
Are you okay? And it's like, check yes, check no. And probably for the first time in my life, I'm like, I'm not doing good. Like I was working shift work. My sleep was terrible. Eating, everything. Everything you can imagine, like a marker of good health is like, it's just not there. And I finally like fill this out, go to Texas, go through the post-mobilization health screening, and I sit down with a provider who looks at my sheet and like, oh my God, like what? Like I think like you have PTSD. And I think to me, it's like one of the hardest things in the military is that PTSD is such a big word, and especially for somebody like me who's not seen combat. Like I think there is a idea or thought process that combat veterans own PTSD, and that to me was at the time. And I don't necessarily think I had PTSD. I think I was just going through a tough time.
Would it be like almost to claim that you had PTSD without being deployed or like in battle? Almost, I don't say shameful, but like, no, that can't be.
Yeah,
it, right?
absolutely.
This can't be it. Yeah.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I think to me it's that. And I think she started going down a trail, and I think that's what really turned me off to maybe not. I don't necessarily think I had PTSD. I think I was just going through a really hard time. But then she started saying like, hey, has your chain of command talked you out of getting mental health or whatever? And it just shut me down. It's like, I don't want to deal with this. Like I'm not trying to like get anybody in trouble or incriminate anybody. Like I'm done. And then so
like stay right there for a second because that's interesting to me, right? Because you said you're 24.
Yep, 24. Yeah. I guess at the time I would have been. I guess at that point I might have been 25.
Yeah. But so super young.
Yeah,
like completely young. I like where your head was at though, because you're just like, she brought up mental health. Like, hey, did any of your chain of command know, right? And like totally correct me because I don't want to speak out of turn, but like you're immediately like you shut down. Yeah. Oh, I don't, no, I don't want to get anyone in trouble. I don't want anyone to know.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, so like as men, right? How many times that we ourselves just shut down because someone may think differently than us, or it may show a level of vulnerability and weakness.
Absolutely.
And like, so in that time, like, and it's been some years. Chris isn't 25, guys. He's at least 28 by now.
Yeah, but something like that.
Can you think back at that time? Like, would you think that was part of it, or what do you think led to you just being like, "Oh, nope, I don't want to get anyone in trouble"?
I think with shame as well. I mean, and again, it's just like the Army. I shouldn't say the Army, but the VA is just bogged down. Like the VA, like. I mean, I think the purpose of it is great, and I think there are some great VA clinics, and I'm sure there are some great people that work for the VA, but there's plenty of service members who, commit fraud and claim false things and to get a disability paycheck from the Army to get paid for the rest of their life. And I think to me it was like, I'm not ready to leave the Army yet. Like, I don't want to get out of the Army. Like, I don't want to be forced out, med boarded out because I have I'm going through a hard time or seeking mental health treatment. And I think I didn't really I think especially with post global war on terror medical care, like behavioral health treatment is a lot more accessible. I think at the time, just my ignorance and being relatively young, I was not sure about it.
And you say ignorance, right? But if we are being like super honest, so I'm 39. I'm Chris's elder, y'all. Chris is elder, and Chris is 30, right?
30, yep, on the nose.
30. But like, how much growing up, when we grew up, did you hear anything discussed about men's mental health? Or let's take it a step further, like just men's capacity of feelings and thoughts, right?
Yeah. I mean,
like, and so like we sit here and say, like, hey, we didn't know, but the reality was this was not talked about in mainstream society, in our schools. I mean, and even until recently, like you made a good comment about like the Army having a survey, right? And so when I go to the doctor, I think the last year they have like this survey, like, are you okay? Have you felt sad? Do you feel depressed? And immediately what comes to mind is like, I'm not going to answer these questions, yes, because I don't want you knowing how I'm feeling, right? Number one. And then number two, are you going to help me or just throw medication at me? And it's like, I like what you said about how like it's ignorance, but then too, like we weren't educated to it.
Absolutely.
And so now fast forward 5 years later, like you've got some education behind it.
Absolutely. And to me, I think the hardest part of this ordeal was coming home. And that anything is that, and I think if there had to be a behavioral health term thrown at this, it would have been an adjustment disorder, because I showed up back home, and I think in my mind, and I've noticed this a lot in my life, a lot of times where I've been really disappointed with things that have happened is that, it's just a common theme in Western storytelling, is the happily ever after, is that everything's okay. Like you get over the hill, the grass is greener. And for me, that was not the case. There's a pretty phenomenal scene, and then I'm probably going to lose you here, but Lord of the Rings. But after
I'm officially lost. I don't know what that is.
But there's the gang gets back essentially back home, and they're in a tavern, and they're drinking beer, and they look around, and they've experienced something dramatic and life changing, and the rest of the world, or the world that they left, is just still the same, like it never happened. And I think that to me was what happened when I came home, and that I piled on a bunch of things, like a new homeowner, new pet owner, starting a new job. And at this time, I was working for a small business, and I'm working with my friends at the time, and I just assumed that this was going to be great. And you're not dealing with the issue. Like, I'm not addressing kind of the pain or the grief or anxiety inside of me. And it just turned into something that all-consuming, that I imagined that I could just leave something where it was, that these emotions were tied to a place, or tied to a physical location, or tied to a job. And there's a common factor, I think, in mental health that I think we struggle to understand, and it's just like the person feeling it. Like, you can't escape the walls of your skull, like no matter how hard you try. And I got home, and everything slowly, not fast, just started coming unglued. And I think a thing for me, like with dealing with grief, was that you look to addictive things. There's
things to take our attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And take your attention, not address the wounds inside of you. And to me, my bank account was being drained. Like, yeah. I couldn't see it. My life was on the current path, or what I could foresee was about to end very poorly.
Would you say like a spiraling effect? But you said this, right? And I love that you said this. You're like, it wasn't this immediate, ooh, everything's going bad. Mm-hmm. It was like these smaller decisions over time, and maybe you going against some of your own like values. Mm-hmm. At what point were you like, ooh, this is kind of caught up to me?
So I got home in November, and around April, I bottomed out. Like it took, it took that period of time, and to me it wasn't super quick. I know, like, maybe looking back, like, hey, 5 months isn't a long time in adult years, but to me it flew by, and I discovered
in army years,
yeah, and
it's very slow.
And I was terrible at work. Like, I wasn't pulling my weight, and especially for a small business, it's that.
So stay there for a sec, right? Because from this conversation, you're a very transparent conversation, which I love. I already have like ideas of other podcasts we're going to do, hopefully.
Okay.
Like, so with that though, right? So you make a great point. You're like, I wasn't giving my best. I wasn't giving 100%, like at work, maybe in other areas of life. Was there anyone in your life, and we're going to use a word here that everyone hates, accountability, and I hate that word just as much as everybody else hates that word, but like accountability, or was there anyone even in the realm of your circle who was able to be like, hey man, how are things? And not just like hey, how's work? How's life? But actually like, hey, how are things? Like, was there anyone around you that you felt comfortable with, or was it even taking that step?
So I think to me, like, what made it even worse during this time is that I worked with the people that were my best friends at the time. And I think that, like, the nature of anything going into business with somebody, as I'm sure you're aware of, is that, like, the relationship dynamics change.
Yep,
and
100%.
And especially when there's money involved, especially when there's livelihood involved. And to me, it's just like the combination of not pulling my weight at the place I was working. And then I think that looking back, it was more from the sense of like, okay, I need you to work, not what's wrong with you. Like, this isn't right.
Valid.
I need you to do this and this.
And that's a hard spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know you lead soldiers for what you do, and I'm sure it's a tough spot that you have been in and will be in the future, where it's just like, hey, I hear you, but I also need X, Y, and Z from you. Because I know as a business owner myself, right, there have been times where we've had employees they've been going through really hard lifetimes, and I want to be there for them, and we are there for them. And also too, in the back of your mind, you're like, I also need them to do X, Y, and Z. And so I think it goes back to like, and it's very person dependent and business dependent, but like the end goal, right? If your end goal as a business is to make money and to survive, which is the end goal of a lot of businesses, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But from what I know about you and myself and a couple others in our circle, like our end goal wants to be empower individuals to become the best version of themselves. And then that may take some time of like pulling back on the monetary and just being like, hey, maybe you just need some time. How can we help you through this? Which is super rare, right? And I'm sure,
absolutely,
like for you and for a lot of us, if my boss came to me and I was like, hey, man, so yeah, you're not really pulling your weight around here. Just want to point that out to you.
Yeah.
The last thing I'm probably going to do, if I'm being transparent and say, you know what, man, I've been going through a really tough season. And, man, it's affecting everything in my life. I would probably be like, I'll do better. And just go into this hyper work mode and hammer. And that's like what a lot of us do as men.
Yeah. And I think to me, and that's – and I couldn't find a gear and I couldn't find an out. Well, I think I came to the conclusion that I had an out. And that to me – and I think this is probably one of the hardest things to talk about on something recorded or something to be published is that I was ready for it to end. And I think to me it's that you reach a point that nothing's going right and that the grass is not greener. And not only is it the grass not greener where you're at, but you can't see where the grass will be green again. And so in April, I had a bunch of pills lying around and I just downed them. And you think about it for a second and you think about oblivion and you think about one, that it was like a spontaneous thing, that I'm not leaving a goodbye. I'm leaving things that I care about. I'm leaving behind my family who's dealing with a pretty traumatic loss. And I think in that moment, in like this one moment stretched into eternity, and I make myself throw up, is this isn't what I want. And I just want this period of my life to be over. I don't want to die. And I think the greatest fortune of all of this is that I didn't do something more dramatic like most men do. And most men will use a gun or do something you can't recover from. And it, you know what? Like I walk through that, and eventually, as you can imagine, just months of non-performance eventually comes to a head. Is that you can't tolerate it as a business owner, and that when it finally came to a head, and I really look back at this, and I know that the reality is that you just want me to perform. Yeah. But it's the confrontation happened between me and my friends and the business owners, and that just like came out of me like, hey, this is what happened. Like and the response, and again, like was just at the it's not again, but it just came across as very callous. And
I think too, my apologies.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that you had a good point. I think too, like what I'm learning, right, is the expectation that we may place on others, right, to on how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
Because I think, right, and I think about it in my own life, like if I'm if I'm having a day or a couple days where maybe I'm not in the best mental health space and I go to a loved one, I tell them that, I'm not telling them that to fix me in the moment, because I think the reality is, and I say this more towards if you're a husband or a wife, mainly wives, because we're talking about men's mental health here.
Yeah.
If your husband comes to you and number one, he has the confidence to say to you that he's struggling, like that's a huge win.
Absolutely.
Because no man wants to look weak to their spouse, like at all. And number two, don't feel like you have to fix that man in the moment, because you said something great, Chris. We're not puppets to fix. And I think a lot of the times that if we're going through something, people automatically want to fix it, because none of us like to sit in that uncomfortable position and space. Simon Sinek recently did a video where he talked about, we have this mentality that when people are going through hard times, tough times, that we initially just want to cheer them up, right? Think how much when we were younger it was about cheering people up. Like think about it as a kid, right? If I'm as a kid and I scrape my knee or something happens, my parents are going to be like, oh, hey, here's some ice cream, be happy. That's why I was chubby when I was little, Mom, thanks. But the reality is, right, none of us want to be in that uncomfortable position with that person. And Simon says it so best, where he was like, change your thinking of rather trying to pull that person out of that ditch or valley that they're in, that you're coming alongside of them and sitting in that. And when I heard that, that was like, hit me like a ton of bricks, because I've been the person like, hey, let me cheer you up. And, you say that and going back to what we were talking about, like if a man shares that with his spouse, right, your job is not to fix that man. But your job may be is to sit in that uncomfortability with your husband or your friend or your boyfriend or whomever that may be for a time being. Because what he's going through may take longer than an hour or 2 hours to get through. And so like you talk about like that expectation, right? Because I know sometimes I struggle with that. I struggle with wanting people to have this expectation, because I know if I am sharing what I'm going through, for me, this is just for me, that's my cry for help, because I'm not going to come out and tell you I need help. I'll tell you, yeah, things are rough or my head's not in it today, but you will not hear me come out and say, I need help. And so with that too, it's almost like looking back at it, right? You couldn't fault them for not having that, but I'm sure today, like if switch roles, right? You were the boss and someone comes to you, I'm sure it'd be a little bit different how you'd respond.
Absolutely. And I think to me is that it's hard to balance that line between friendship and boss. And especially when things are on the ropes. And I think the time was that things were on the ropes, and I didn't add to that. And but it legitimately broke something in me at the time. And it's that, I did this, went through this period. I went to my mom passed away, went to DC, came back trying to find my footing, and it legitimately broke something in me and kind of turned me into just like a ghost. I think would probably be the best way to describe it. And just going through life through the motions. And man. And I think a lot of men, and I say going as a ghost, but like going through life as a ghost, but just existing. And
robots.
Yeah, robots. And there's no soul or there's no emotion behind what you do. It's you go through it, you wake up, put your pants on, go through the day, come back home, repeat, like rinse and repeat. How does it change? And I remember that fall, I got a roommate, and he was going through a heinous time in his life, just extremely damaged and broken from his time in the Marines, and he lived with me, and I just remember that like being a period in my life where I had like no shelter. So I would go to the place where I used to work with like the people that used to be my employers, used to be my friends. Then I'd go to work. Then I'd come home, and it was just chaos and mess. And then I remember that, what do I need? Like where can I go? And that's when I said, hey, like what's going to church? At the time, like I was living the life of an apostate, and I started going to church. And another thing, and I think a big reason why that was, is that at the place I used to work, like there was a noon class So I worked as a CrossFit coach, and so the coaching staff, like nobody liked to do noon, but I would essentially work night shift, get off work, get home at 7, go home, go to sleep, wake up around 11, go coach noon.
Get a good 4 hours of sleep.
Get a good 4 hours of sleep.
Great for your health.
And go then go to work or go home, go to sleep, and then do it all over again. But it's like I look at those times and it's just like I think about the people who saved my life, and that there's people like the Rochesters, Trey Stallsmith, Nikki Freeman, and those people inspired me to realize that, hey, like this is not the end. Like there's more to life. And I think to me that having people like, I think to me, like ultimately with mental health is mercy. I think people seek mercy, and to know that, hey, like you're going through a time or you're going through a phase, here's a drop of mercy that is not the end of the world. Because I think people's shame and guilt over things that have happened is so overwhelming and so soul crushing that legitimately, like I think shame and guilt are pretty much pave the way to hell on a lot of people.
Definitely paralyzing.
Mm-hmm. But I feel like I can keep going down this path for a while, but
so
I don't want to
hold up a little
bit.
That was the first question, Chris, and you hammered that out,
go.
Man. I think we're 30 minutes in.
30 minutes in. Damn. Okay.
So with that, right, and so and part of that, we're going to get into these other questions, but part of that too, I want to caveat, and is so like with Chris openly sharing that, right, and this was not scripted for us to share this. I learned just a lot about him right there. Is and what I share for myself too. This isn't a cry for us for help.
No, not at all.
and so. And I say that because I remember last November I posted something up on social media after my friends had did that great thing for me. And I touched on a little bit about where I was in life. And I touched on a little bit about men's mental health. And the reaction was nothing that I wanted. The reaction was people reaching out, oh my God, I had no idea you're going through such a hard time. I'm so sorry. And I remember sharing with my wife, like, that's no, like this isn't about me. This isn't about you. That post was to bring light to something, and just like this conversation, right, is to bring light. And so as much as we absolutely love everyone listening and watching and commenting, like me and Chris aren't sitting here saying like, hey, we're going through rough times, you know,
absolutely
pull us out of this. No, we're trying to bring light to this. And I think too, as if you see that on social media from other people, some people I'm sure will glamorize that and want attention. But I think if it comes to a man, and like you talked about, a man who's very robotic, who's going through life through and through, you know, that's just him just letting you know some things. But commenting and telling him you're so sorry and hope things get better, that's not really the cure. No. And so from that, we're going to move on just a couple of things that we're going to talk about. So recently, I was watching, I ended up watching videos. I need to do something with my life.
Videos are perfect.
There is this, we'll call him fitness influencer. He is a 5-time Mr. Olympia. His name is C-Bum. He has a real name. I just don't know what it is. On Instagram, it's C-Bum. Yep. Google it. And so recently he was in an interview, and this man has won the Olympia 5 times in a row. Extremely successful, has set goals for himself and hit them, has done very well in business. And at the end of this interview, he said, they're interviewing him. He says, you know, you've done all these things. How do you feel? And he goes, lonely. And I watched this video, right? And on the outskirts, here's this highly successful man. Looks like he has everything going for him. And he's so stoic in how he just says lonely. And you know, the reason that we're calling this podcast for now, I think this is the name we're going with, is called Unmasked.
Let's go.
Because we believe that a lot of men wear masks in life. And to Chris's great point he said earlier, we have men who are going through life, rinse and repeat cycle. Men who are going through life, not living, not thriving, but just existing. And so we say unmasked because we believe, and we've done it ourselves in our lives, where we've put masks on because we don't know how to cope with life. And you know, you openly shared about your mom and grieving that. And like immediately what came to my mind is like, God, we could do a whole podcast on the grieving process for men.
Absolutely.
Because you lost your mom early, I lost my father early, and just what that leads to. And then so when I think about men masking their emotions, like I look at the outsources they have. You touched briefly on addiction, but what I've seen in men's life and my own life is like, as men, we don't know how to cope. So when life happens, right? So good, bad, indifferent, we don't know how to cope. And so we're looking at all these other resources to cope. And so whether it's video games, now I know you think that's crazy. Like, no, video games are for kids. I know grown men who are choosing to almost turn their brain off when they come home and just put themselves in video games in a fantasy world to not deal with what they have to. You know, work is a huge one. You know, I 100% will call myself out that I will bury myself in work to not deal with some of the emotional stuff that I need to deal with. You had talked a little bit about like vices, right? We all know that like drugs, alcohol, all those things are just masking what's actually happened. Even social media, right? Getting on your phone at night and just a good friend of mine called it brainless scrolling.
I like it.
Or doom scrolling, where you're just doom scrolling, you know? And you're doing that because you don't want to truly deal with the emotions and stuff you're dealing with. And so in your own life, Chris, like talk a little bit about like, so your mother passed when you were 24, 25?
24. Yeah,
24, right? The coping mechanism. So kind of like what you said, like, hey, to cope, I turned to like this. After you got through that, did you ever stumble upon healthy coping mechanisms?
I think absolutely. You know what? That faith goes a long way. That there's so many things that I genuinely believe that humans experience that we don't necessarily have the tools to solve. And you know, there's drugs, there's alcohol, there's various things to take you different places. But I believe faith has to be paramount for me. And faith not only being that there is a better tomorrow, that there's a better future, but also like faith knowing that like I'm somebody of value, that I'm something of value, and that there's somebody above who loves me and has chosen me to do things. And I think to me, like even explaining that, like none of that seems very masculine, I don't think. Yeah. Like to say that I need to be loved or I need to be valued to do something of value, because you're not in control.
I love though the fact that you were able to say that, right? Because I know about you saying it felt weird in your soul, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, because like you just said some words that like what man would openly just say like, hey, I want to be valued, but like we're going to touch on that. But that's beautifully put that you said that. And I like the thing on faith too, because growing up, I think there has been a separation between faith and mental health, right? Where some may fall under the fact of like, well, you just got to pray more. And for a long time, I may have believed that, and I'm not knocking prayer. Prayer works, y'all. 100% living proof of that. But I think we have to understand too that the Lord is going to put individuals, mental health individuals, professionals in your life to help. And I think the sooner that we can address that, and even if it's not a mental health professional, he may put individuals in your life to help. And some of those prayers that you're praying to get you out of this valley, to help you deal with those emotions you become so numb to, he's trying to answer with using other people, but you have to be open to do that. And so like you talk about coping, right? And I think back to when, you know, my father passed at 24, and like we're not taught coping when we're younger. No. Like at all. Like if you're taught coping, man, you are like way ahead. I posted this on social media yesterday. TD Jakes, there we go. TD Jakes was the pastor. And he said, you know, growing up, you fall and skin your knee. Hey, get up. You're fine. Shake it off. Don't cry. Be a man. And for our generation, like that was ingrained in us so much that we've taken that to a point towards like we don't cope, we ignore. Right?
Absolutely.
If we could do a soundbite on that, how amazing would that be? But like we don't cope, we ignore. And then we have created generations of men who are ignoring. Right? And so they don't know how to have coping mechanisms between their wife or their girlfriend when things go awry, or their kids are acting up at home and they don't know how to cope with that. And so then they're ignoring. And when we say ignoring, we're meaning they're ignoring with, you know, we talk about video games or vices or social media or work or other women, or they're putting themselves in those things. And so I think when we talk about healthy coping mechanisms, you know, you talk about faith. One thing I know that helped me too was like journaling. And I think too, when I started to journal, I felt like it was not a proud moment in my life, right? I was not like, I'm going to write my feelings down today, you know? But it was like, you know, I started young. I started when I was like, I think it was like right after my father passed. No, actually, excuse me. I take that back. It was 3 years after my father passed, I started journaling. And I remember it felt so weird in the moment because I felt like I should be stronger than this. And everything told me growing up I should be stronger, because kind of like what you said, like when my father passed, there wasn't a grieving period. It was I got to take care of my mom. I got to take care of my mom. That's my focus. And so like when I started journaling, it was really helpful to see my thoughts on paper, because I think a lot of the times men, if we're being super honest, you are keeping these thoughts up here and they're running a show in your mind, and you're letting them run a show in your mind because you're fabricating stories over and over because you're too scared, fearful, or ashamed to get those out. And so when I started journaling, I noticed that like some of those unhealthy thoughts I'm getting out on paper, and I'm recognizing how unhealthy those are. So for you, from the faith is one, for journaling for me is another. Anything else that kind of stuck out for you from a healthy coping mechanism?
I think to me is that community is a huge thing. And it's kind of funny, I guess, coming from a CrossFit background, where I will say one thing about CrossFit, and that does it better than anybody else, is community. And that and it's just there. You step into a good gym and there's a community there and people take you in. And I think for me, like being in a place with other people and having the ability to just work out meant a lot to me. And actually kind of where I really felt that community is, like I mentioned Nikki Freeman before, but when COVID happened, it's like, hey, our gym shut down. We're like, hey, why don't you come, Chris, why don't you come to my driveway and we'll work out. And I think to me that's one of the things I can pinpoint is like, okay, my life really started to turn around. And that, you know, like having somebody or a place to go and work out and just be yourselves and sometimes tackle life's problems there with you went a long way. And I think for both of us, it was that I was probably about eight or so months removed from kind of having my life kind of flipped. And it just, everything worked out. And in a weird way, as the COVID pandemic would work out for me, it probably actually saved my life and put me on a good
Crazy to think, right?
Yeah.
Crazy to think. I like what you said, though, about having – so you had a healthy outlet. And I'll say this just not about CrossFit, because I don't want to make this about CrossFit, but about like just health and wellness in general, right? Suffering next to someone changes the dynamic of your relationship. And so for you to say, hey, I went to this person's driveway and worked out every day, you suffered together, and through shared suffering increases vulnerability and authenticity, and probably makes it easier to have conversations. And so what I just said, men, is number one, you have to be able to suffer a little bit, and that's okay. Don't shy away from suffering. I think we have started to get into a place and space in life where we run away from suffering, and suffering can be used as good things. And I think, too, men, you have to understand that when you suffer with other people, you are opening a part of yourself. And it's not a bad thing. I think we have such hard exteriors, and we want to keep that up as a mask, as a facade, as Chris said earlier in such a great way, very stoic. But I think when you're able to find that person or persons, it doesn't have to be a whole group of people, right, y'all? And you can start to shed those layers. I think that's a huge thing.
Absolutely.
So going from that, staying on the video theme here, Chris, of videos I listen to.
Let's go.
So Chris Rock, do you know who Chris Rock is?
Yes.
Do you really? At 30 years old?
Yeah, 30 years old.
Who is
I'm
Chris
trying
Rock?
to. Oh man, now I feel like I feel,
On the spot.
Man, Chris Rock. What has Chris Rock been? And I about said Rush Hour, but that's not Chris Rock. Trying to
that's
think.
Chris
where,
Tucker, folks.
I'm trying to think. I know Chris Rock, and I feel really guilty now that I can't name a movie.
Man,
with
I
him
hope
in
Chris Rock is watching this. How crazy is that? Chris Rock is a comedian.
Well, he got slapped by Will Smith. There we go. Boom. That's a movie he was in. Let's go.
So Chris Rock is a stand-up comedian.
Yep.
And he released this video, man, long time ago. And I'm going to give you guys the cliff notes of this. And so don't DM me and say, this is actually what he said. These are the cliff notes of it. He releases a video on unconditional love. He said, only women, children, and dogs. I'll say that again. Only women, children, and dogs get loved unconditionally. But a man has to prove and provide himself. And I remember when I first heard that video, like I was super taken back. Like, this dude doesn't know what he's talking about. Or like, this is such a lie. And the more I got that, I'm just like, I've never met a dog I don't love. I'll tell that right now. Never met a dog I don't love. Love dogs, right? Never met a kid I don't love. Maybe annoyed with them, but definitely love them. And so with that, right? And so talking about how men have to prove and provide, we're gonna get on a soapbox here for a minute.
Let's go.
We're gonna get on a soapbox about the state of men in society, how men are viewed, and all this jazz. And I'm just going to kind of give my 2 cents here, right?
Let's go.
So I firmly believe that this is just my opinion. This is not even Chris's opinion. This is just my opinion. I firmly believe we are in a space and a place right now where men are probably viewed as low as possibly they could be in the history of probably manhood. And I say that not in a victim mind, oh, feel bad for me, but I'm saying that because I want you to hear me, that men, when they are healthy, can help build families, can help build communities, can help build society, can help lead generations. When men are healthy. When men are unhealthy, men can destroy families, men can destroy businesses, men can destroy communities, men can bring down almost everything around them. And we've seen that throughout history with very unhealthy men who have been in places of power. And I believe we're in this space and place right now where men have been and viewed upon kind of bottom of the barrel. And you have this thing called toxic masculinity. And then the opposite of that is you have what's called a beta male. And so if toxic masculinity is like all the way over on the pendulum over here, and then beta male is all the way over here. And, like I've heard toxic masculinity be thrown around as individuals who look like you and I, we're larger individuals. We work out, we have tattoos, and just by the way we look, we are toxic. And what I want to say on that is you are right, there is toxic masculinity. There are men in this world who are not good men, who probably view themselves in a sense that they're better than others, that they're prideful, that they're egotistical, and that they hurt people. And definitely they can be toxic. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to cast a net over men throughout the entire world, that's what they are. Because my personal belief, we won't get into this for a second, is God created man. It was very simple. God created man from the dust of the earth. When God created man, he put him in the garden. His job was to name the beasts of the fields and to tend to the garden. So right from the get-go, man was called to lead. Now I feel that to the core of my being. And men out there's some of y'all who are not leading in your household. And I say that from a place of love because inside of you, you have been built and created and formed to lead. And so what happens is we have this place and time where we're at now to where men have not stepped up to lead, and women in turn have had to take on that role. Because women will make it work, because women are survivors, and women will get it done 100%. If you want something done, go find a woman because they are amazing. But what's happened in society now is we have these men, right, who have not stepped up to lead their families, and the women and the wives have stepped up to do it. And what happens is these men become very disconnected. And rather than the wives or other men in their lives challenge them, they just sit back and they put themselves in, like we talked earlier, video games, work, social media, other vices, pornography. Yes, I said pornography on this podcast because if we're being honest, men, large amount of us struggle with that, right? But we're not going to talk about it. We're just going to mask over it. And so then men disconnect, and there's no one in their circles to challenge them to be better, and their spouse may not even want to challenge them. And so then on the other side of this, you have what's called a beta male. A beta male is maybe someone who is very disconnected, who is maybe not masculine. And I hate the fact that we've gotten on this view that masculinity is this bad thing, because I firmly believe that masculinity can be healthy when directed. And healthy masculinity looks like a man who's providing for his family, a man who's presiding. And when I say presiding over his family, I mean that he's protecting them. He's presiding and leading, and a man that's protecting his family. And so I believe that a man was built and created for this. So what we have to do is we have to lose this stigma that toxic masculinity is this one thing, and beta masculinity is this other thing. There are pockets of these, but that overall healthy masculinity can help drive families and communities and businesses and things forward. And that in no way, shape, or form is saying that females cannot do that. I'm just coming from a male standpoint. And I'm totally going to turn this back over to Chris here in a second. But like, I think, right? And tell me if you see this. Like, I see this in my life with my friends that I love. It doesn't change the way I feel, but I see men in my life who have marriages and kids, and they start taking a back seat, and their spouses are doing everything. And the men just disconnect and kind of zone out. And then the spouses get used to that, and it creates this dynamic where men are no longer like leading and providing and presiding.
Absolutely. And I think to me is that I think you had a good illustration between the beta male and the Toxic masculinity. There we go. And I think there's different components of manhood, and that like I think for me, like you have Jesus Christ is one, somebody who provides and protects and who leads, and then like I think for like a Western sense, I mean we grew up 80s, 90s, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like wow, look at Arnold, like totally. Not roided up, just super strong, and then
Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, Sylvester Stallone, and I think like, and you sent me something, and I'm, why was it Brian Driscoll?
Mark Driscoll.
Excuse me.
Yep.
And talking about how like we've fallen in love in the West with the lone wolf male archetype, and I it's great in a literary sense, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in nature, and it doesn't exist in reality. And that's the best way to die without meeting your worth or finding your worth or finding something. And I mean, for me, it's kind of funny growing up that being maybe a little bit, I'm trying to think, my reading not being moderated enough by my mom. Like I read the Punisher comics, which are probably a lot more graphic than the miniseries. But it's falling in love with like the archetype of Frank Castle. Like, you know what, Frank Castle doesn't need therapy. Frank Castle needs a machine gun and some bad guys.
Did you watch that on when that was on Disney Plus, right? The Punisher series?
I watched it when it was on Netflix. I haven't seen it on.
Yeah, maybe it was on Netflix. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All I know is that literally there's a moment in there where he's just like murdering everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say this, and someone's gonna comment, but like a part of me was like, damn, that was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think
that was, but he was like such a closed off, cold man, and you make a great point of like the characters that we saw growing up were those very like over the top characters.
Absolutely, and I think there's like this opinion, I shouldn't say opinion, but like if these are our models for masculinity, can we even reach them? Number one, and looking at Frank Castle and his backstory, it's like I don't think I want to have Frank Castle's backstory.
I don't want it that bad,
and then we maybe look at Christ and we acknowledge as Christians that like Christ is to a certain extent like that's unobtainable. Like we're not going to be perfect. We are man and we're going to fall and fail and sin. And to me, it's just masculinity isn't one thing. I think protection, providing, presence is another one. And I think it's funny to me that I was just thinking about, okay, like what falls within, like who are like men that are really favored? And it's like looking at the season kind of about to be honest, is like Santa Claus. I've never heard
chubby
anybody.
Men are favored.
Yeah, chubby men are favored. But, hey, he's old. He's kind of old. But
he's old. He's
yeah, but it's just, I've never heard Santa Claus being called feminine or beta male or
it's true.
Anything like that. But it's just like, he brings a mirth and a joy, and I think to me it's one of those things as men is that I think presence is a huge one that we miss out on, and if you can bring joy and mirth into your home, like you set the thermostat for your relationship, you set the thermostat for your family, and you set the thermostat in whatever room you're in, and in a way it's one of the easiest ways to be a leader.
That's good, Chris.
If I want to come in ticked off and down, is that people are going to mirror that. But there's levels of masculinity, and maybe the Santa Claus illustration wasn't the best one. But
no, dude, you can never go wrong with someone chubby. Santa Claus, Shrek, they're all the same thing. I like how you talk though too about like the correlation of masculinity from one side, like the Frank Castle, and then it's like to Jesus Christ. Because I think I grew up Catholic, and so a lot of the times, right, this was never taught in Catholicism, and probably shouldn't have been taught in Catholicism. But like the more I did my own research, right, and so I think Jesus is viewed upon as this very meek. And mild-mannered shepherd. And so growing up, you have this view of him like, oh, yeah, man, this guy just loved everybody. He's just like this free-flowing spirit. And like to get to understand a shepherd, right, and how shepherds had to protect their flock and fight for their flock, and to know that like Jesus was going against the flow, right? And it was going against the law. And so just to have the confidence to stand up to that. And then the more I learned about David, right? You hear these stories of David and Goliath, but the reality is if you go and actually do some studying upon David, how he fought other territorial animals that were coming after his sheep, and that's where he was learning. And so then you see at the core of man is this aggression and intensity that can be so beneficial when controlled. And I think that's where we lose it, right? Because I think we have these pockets where men are so aggressive and intense and they go over the top and things happen. And people are like, oh my God, look at men. This is how they all are. Yeah. When I'm a firm believer that like aggression and intensity when controlled has been used in the course of history to protect families.
Absolutely.
To provide over families. That was good. All right, so we're going to go through a couple of questions here. Just Chris and I back and forth, and we're going to answer some questions we got from Instagram. So Chris, how can we bring awareness to this in your opinion?
I think this is a great place to start right here to talk about it. And I don't think it's a bad thing to talk about. And maybe not go up to somebody and ask, how's your mental health today? Brian, like, how you doing? But just asking, are you okay? Or, I think even setting time aside for people goes a long way. I know you're a big proponent of getting coffee, or
big proponent of caffeine, yes.
Maybe even playing pickleball now. But I think when you set time aside for people, it goes a long way. And especially in chances, giving people an opportunity to be vulnerable and share what's on their mind goes a long way. What about you?
I love that. I think there's twofold to it too, right? I think, like, if I look back starting out, right, if someone was to ask me to coffee, I'd be very taken back because I'd be like, what? Why do you want to have coffee with me, right? So I think as men, right, we need to look at, like, who's in our circle and who's in our circle we can trust. And I think that's huge. I think, like, Chris and I are sitting here telling you, like, go find, like, 10 dudes and really trust those 10 dudes and, like, open up. No, but, like, I think you've got to find in your life one, maybe two, aside from your spouse, that you can really lean into, and that you can be okay with having uncomfortable conversations. And I've said this to a couple of my close friends before, like, hey, what I'm going to tell you is not to scare you, but this is where I'm at. And the response has always been so amazing. Like, hey, thank you for sharing that. And so I think that's part of it. Then to the men out there, right, who don't feel comfortable doing that, 100% okay. You got to start somewhere though, because my genuine fear is that what Chris said earlier, that we have men just going through life, that continues, and that we lose out on leadership, and that we lose out in raising families and raising other young men who know how to lead and process their emotions and cope with that. So if you don't feel like you've got people in your circle, you don't feel comfortable, and just take time to jot some thoughts down. I'm not telling you that every morning you have to journal for 15 minutes and light a candle. What I'm telling you is that maybe next time you're sitting there and you're taking a poop, and rather than scroll Instagram for 37 minutes and send memes to your wife, I know that from experience. No. Maybe you just open up your notes app in your phone and you just scroll some things, write some things down.
Absolutely.
So with that, Chris, what do you in particular want to get through to men through this?
I think to me is that, one, knowing you're not alone, and then I know I shared a lot today. And to me, I think the worst thing that men feel is they feel on an island, that they feel alone. And you're not alone. People feel these emotions, and over the course of human history, men before you have felt these emotions. And whether they were able to express it in a way in a healthy manner, or do it away, like they've had to deal with this, that human experiences are not unique to an individual. And to me, find somebody you can confide in. And if you can't find somebody to confide in, find somebody you can see. To me, church was an amazing outlet for me. Finding people who were interested in your salvation and knowing you and getting you close to knowing the Lord meant the difference to me between prolonging my suffering indefinitely. And I think that is one of the worst things you can do, is just prolong it indefinitely by not dealing with it. What do you think, Gordon?
Dude, what a great word you said. This is not something new, that men have felt this forever. And I couldn't help but think about, like, my great grandparents who went through the Great Depression, my grandfather who went through the war, and my father was in the military, right? And so we just think the generations of men who came before us who've had these thoughts and feelings. And honestly, like, what a blessing in 2023 that we have a platform to actually share about this. They didn't have that back then.
No.
Right? Like, what a blessing that, like, men aside from us are, like, stepping up and doing that. But for me, what I want to get through to men is, like, you hit the nail on the head. Like, man, you're not alone. I had a good buddy, and it almost makes me borderline emotional. I had a good buddy reach out to me, and he just said, I feel like I'm in the background of my life and I'm just playing a character. And, like, man, that hit me to my core. I don't want any man to feel that way. But I totally felt that way. And I connected with him in that moment because I felt that way in my life, where you're just going through the motions and like playing a character. And so for men, I just want to reiterate what Chris said, like, hey, man, you're not alone. And I'm not going to sit here and say that, like, come to me and Chris, we'll take you through some therapy sessions. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is I'm just telling you you're not alone. And if you find any solace in the fact that you've been watching this thing for an hour, just know that you're not alone. And that there's people in your life that you can trust. You just got to get to that place.
Absolutely.
So a couple of resources that are available. And so, you know, Chris said this, and I'll definitely agree with it. So counseling and therapy, just me saying those words makes my stomach hurt because I think it invokes a sense of weakness. Now, let me tell you this. Those are feelings. Those aren't facts. And I think as a lot of time as men, we get so caught up in feelings, we let those think they're facts. And so, you know, I have been to a counselor to help deal with some of the father wounds I've had. And I'm currently seeing another counselor, different counselor, not doing two at once here, guys. Totally sounded like that.
Don't cheat on your other counselor. Yeah. No.
And I'm currently seeing one just for some other things in life. To get to that point was not my decision. And here's what I mean. I've had some really good friends in life who've challenged me. And one was, I don't know how many months ago, I was probably just venting one day. And they texted me and they just said, hey, how long has it been since you saw your counselor? And at that time, it had probably been like a year and a half, 2 years, you know, because I get to the point where I'm like, I'm okay. I don't need to see one. I'm fine now. Dumbest mistake. And all they did was they just lovingly said, you know, I think it may be a good idea that you go and meet with them again. And I was like, man, you know, you're right. And then for my current counselor, it was just me actually talking to Chris. And I was like, hey, I've got some thoughts, man. You know anyone that could help? He's like, man, I actually do. And every man that's reached out to me, probably 5 of them in the last couple of weeks, I've said, hey, I've got a counselor. And I give that to him with no expectation because that's a huge step, right? So there are resources out there that are available that are like mental health professionals, that are counselors, that are therapists. That's one avenue. The other resources, Chris touched on it greatly. Hey, there's some great churches. If you want to feel that like that is an avenue that you want to go down, by all means. And then like if you are looking to read, if you are a book reader, right? My favorite book of all time is called Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. Wild at Heart, John Eldridge. It literally tells you how you were created and what you were created for. I read that book when I was 28 and then again when I was 38. And it has just changed the course of my life. Any other resource you can think of, Chris?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, the counselor I see, I guess that we see, has done.
Not together at the same time.
Not together at the same time. Unfortunately, we're just separated by a wall. But to me, it's the easiest money I spend throughout the month, and probably right there with tithing and CrossFit fee, and it just goes a long way for me. And to me, it's just like I'm kind of like in the maintenance phase, I would say. But it's just like an easy every 2 to 3 weeks that I come in, I talk about life, and we have a good rhythm. And it again, going back to the beginning, it allows me to be the best version of myself for the people around me, the people who deserve my best.
That was good. So, Chris, in your opinion, how can loved ones support? So we think of wives, girlfriends, family members. I
think setting time aside to be deliberate, and I think to me is that I can only imagine with a family as not a family person at the moment that there's so many things going on, and that you have, especially with kids and kids' sports and school, setting time aside to be deliberate to spend with your loved one goes a long way. And I think too is that, and it's hard when your needs might not be met, and especially if your man or the man in your life is going through hardship, or if he's just going through the books. Like I think women want to have affirmations of love, and I get that sense of belonging, or that sense that, hey, you still love me. Be careful testing somebody when they don't know they're being tested. And I think a lot of men fail that test when they don't know they're being tested, and it leads to a lot of animosity when there doesn't need to be any. If you're going through a season in your marriage or relationship, or you see a man struggling, don't test them and assume that he's not there or that something's changed. Like that there's battles fought every day in my head, and I imagine for the men in your life's head as well.
God, that was good. You are a wealth of knowledge at 30 years old, folks. Yeah, so how can loved ones support? I think the best way to put this, so like especially like spouses, and I hammer on wives because I'm a husband. I don't know what it's like to have a girlfriend. Haven't had one of those in 14 years. I don't know what that's like. Chris, on the other hand, he can tell you what that's like. This is what I can say to especially like the wives who are watching or fiancés. Your husband is going through some shit every single day in his mind. And I don't say that to alarm you. I say that to bring some reality to your life. Your job should not be to fix or figure out your husband. God made it very clear that he made man and he made woman, and they're made in his image, and they're made differently, right? I can't expect my wife to fix every part of me, hence why I need a savior. Mm-hmm. I can't expect my wife to understand every part of me. And that's the same thing. I think the best thing you can do as a wife is be open for when your husband chooses to share what he's going through, because that is a monumental moment in your life and marriage. I can tell you that right now. Mm-hmm. To have a husband who's willing to sit with his wife and share some things that makes him look weak and vulnerable is changing the course of your marriage. Mm-hmm. And don't push him to do that, right? So I can say one thing that my spouse has been great upon. She will never be like, tell me what's going on right now. Why do you feel this way? How can I fix it? She's been like, okay. And then maybe a couple of days later, she's like, hey, do you want to talk about that? And I'm always like, no, I'm fine. Thanks, though. And she's like, nice try. So with that, I think just being open to know that you hear them. Mm-hmm. And that's going to take me to probably, I think, Chris, the toughest question we are going to ask ourselves today. Mm-hmm. And you're going to start with this one.
Excellent.
How can a man start to get heard, seen, and valued?
Just a softball pitch right down the middle. That's tough. I feel like I'm hitting it with a broomstick. I think to me that finding the correct audience is huge. And looking back at my story is that when I shared my suicide attempt is that I did not have the correct audience. I did not share it in the right place at the right time. And I think that's like that with a lot of men who need to be seen, heard, and valued, is that you do it to people who don't care to do either one of those things, any one of those things. And so finding the correct people, and for some of us that might be finding a new friend group, for some of us that might be finding a new job, but it's hard. But going into places that are safe or going to find people that already value you goes a long way. And I know I feel now like I'm super spoiled because I have that. And I don't need to go searching for that. But there was certainly a time in my life where I did not have that. And I think finding whether it be a mental health professional or a church or a group and slowly working that way up, because again, like so many men carry around so much weight that, you know, it's probably not, we can't cut sling load on it immediately, but hey, we can start to unpack the rucksack one piece of equipment at a time.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think we could do a whole podcast on this question, so I'm going to be super brief. So how can a man start to get heard, seen, and valued? We've got to stop looking at men that their value is tied into what they provide and what they do. Like, think about that for a minute, right? Throughout the course of history in my life, men's value have been placed upon how much they provide, right? Like, it makes my foot tap because it irritates me, because the reality is, like, if you go to your husband, right? If your husband lost his job tomorrow, does your view and value of your husband change? Like, that alone should answer some questions, right? A man is valued because he's a human being and because he's a man. Yet, unfortunately, right now, men are valued based upon what they do or what they provide. Chris Rock said it best. Whenever a woman goes on a date, she comes back and her friends immediately go, what does he do? When a man goes on a date, he comes back and tells friends, and they go, what does she look like? Right? But that's the reality of it. Value a man based on who he is and not what he does. And if you have a man in your life that does a lot, he may be doing some of that because he thinks his worth and value is tied up in his activity and not just him. So a couple of questions from Instagram, and then we're going to close this thing out. Yep, totally had those on my phone. Didn't put this on the thing. I do remember a couple of them.
Let's go.
Okay, I think I remember 2 of them.
Thank you,
There was
Mr.
way more than that. So one question was, I posed this question on Instagram. It was like, shooting a podcast on men's mental health. What do you want to hear? One of my good buddies said that it's real. And so definitely, hopefully you're leaving this conversation today understanding that men's mental health battles are real, hence why we want to have an open conversation about that. The second one I do remember, the importance of men being in community with other men. You want to touch on that one?
Absolutely. To me, nobody knows it better. And one of the things that has really helped me in my life was not being in situations where I'm hanging out with my peers, but as I'm hanging out with older men who have been there and done that and have made something of themselves. One of my really good friends is goes by the name of Mike Reller, and he is one of the kindest, most real gentleman you could ever meet. He owns his own transportation company out of Easley, South Carolina. And to me, that the wealth of knowledge he can share and the life he has lived goes a long way for me. And knowing that I have so much to learn and I have so much to not only learn but apply to my life goes a long way. And there's so many great men in my life who are older than me. I mean, I got one sitting next to me. I also got Stuart Armstrong in Easley, South Carolina, who I worked for a little bit. And I think sometimes being able to realize that, hey, that your story is not finished. You're still in the process of writing it. And I think hearing older men be like, hey, like I remember experiencing that too, it goes a long way. And I think also just being with men and having that fraternal bond goes a long way. I think, to me, one of the highlights of why men's mental health is not where it needs to be is that there's not a lot of men-only spaces anymore.
Oh, gosh, no, there's not.
And so finding an ability to build that, and men's only spaces don't need to be fantasy football leagues or D&D campaigns or playing
tailgating on Saturdays where you spend 8 hours getting drunk for a team you have no connection with. Yeah. That's going to give me some hate.
Man, it needs to be, I think, doing something of value. And
God, good word. Yeah.
And doing something hard. And I think for you, inviting a bunch of us to go work out in your gym on a Saturday morning, and then you have me who's scared, just shaking him up.
Do you think Mike Reller knows how to listen to a podcast?
I think he'll figure it out.
Mike's phone is a flip phone, isn't it?
No, it's not. He has 2 phones, but they're both iPhones.
Mike.
Mike gets it done, and I think of so many men, Mike and Stuart, I love you both very much, and I very unashamed to say that.
I love the fact that he just gave a shout out to me on this.
Let's go.
Hey, Chris, I found some of the questions.
Okay, let's go. Let's go.
All right, so why do men have a hard time being honest and real? We hide our true feeling to make it look like we're okay. What a great question. We've touched on that. Just to touch on that briefly again is because I feel like it's hard to share our innermost thoughts because it makes us look weak. And at the core of us, we don't want to look weak because I think we essentially have tied weakness and vulnerability and authenticity together. And so if we look weak, then others are going to view us as weak. But what that creates, to Chris's great point earlier, is a system of men who are robots.
Absolutely.
This was from a wife. I love that she asked this. How to be supportive to men and encouraging. And I think we touched on that as well. You want to touch on that? Yeah,
I think just allowing him to be vulnerable. And you know what? And I think wives probably know this better than anybody, but that not every day is a victory. Not every day is the Super Bowl. Not every day is your husband the man that he maybe promised to be or maybe is living out to his full potential. But understand that there's still that person in there that you married and that the person you care about, and support him and walk through him in a season and also encourage him. And I think going back to the testing somebody without letting them know they're tested, that's, I think, an easy way to lose trust in people. And I think if your husband is kind of slacking off, or I shouldn't say slacking off, or not providing, getting him connected with other men, I think goes a long way as well.
And that's a great segue. We didn't plan that. That's a great segue, and I'll touch on this last question. So I apologize if I didn't get to your question. There's a lot of them. Is ignoring is not healing. Love that. Men need support systems too, and that's where we'll end on, right? And so I'm a big proponent of kind of what Chris said, is that men need to have support systems in their lives. And so men, I'm going to say this, and I can say this because it's going to sting, and I say this because it's been said to me. If you are surrounding yourself with other men who are not bettering you, is that what you want in your life? Imagine this, that you have a 13-year-old son and all the friends around him are bringing him down, not advancing him in life, what would you say to your son? But yet, as we grow up as men, there's a propensity that we do the same thing, that we surround ourselves with other men who sign off on our BS, who say it's okay, that we're not living up to the potential that we have. Mm-hmm. And so a support system, in my eyes, is a group, doesn't have to be big again, y'all, of individuals who are trying to better you in every aspect of your life. And when I say every aspect, I mean just not financially, not just physically, not just spiritually. I mean everything, physically, financially, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that these individuals are striving and challenging you to be better, because I can tell you as a man, we do not like being challenged. And if you get men around other men who challenge them, Chris can tell you, I challenge men, and that is not always taken great. And it's not always taken great because no one is challenging them in their lives. And so if you're a wife, don't challenge, but ask your husband, who in your circle is supporting you? And then here's a great follow-up question. Who in your circle is letting you just get by or bring you down? If you've got friends, and Chris, please touch on this. If you've got friends where every weekend you're going to tailgate or you're just getting hammered drunk 3 days in a row, I don't know how those friends are bettering you. Mm-hmm. And that's okay if that's where you want to be in life. But I always go back to the legacy that you're going to leave behind. It is very clear that your life is but a mist. It is but a vapor. It is here and it is gone. And so we have this incremental time to leave an impact.
Absolutely. And I think to me, it's that all we have really is our time on earth. And that I don't say that to devalue money or devalue the opportunity to earn wealth, but because wealth is something that you can pass on and you can better your lives and the lives of those around you. But I think to me that we are so consumed in wasting time, and that we deserve the opportunity to waste time, whether that be Netflix, whether that be video games, there's so many useless pursuits. And I say the useless because they're fruitless, that there's no fruit that gets bared from beating Dark Souls or winning or watching every season of The Office 5 times on Netflix or whichever streaming service is on. I'm not sure anymore, but I'm really into things. Or tailgating or cheering for your team. You know, and those can be great memories, perhaps. But you didn't win that trophy. You didn't win that game. You didn't throw that pass. And I look at opportunities, and one of my favorite photos of me and my dad when I was a kid was me and him at Camp Old Indian, and that we're sitting on this this picnic table, and just me losing it and him having a good time. And it's I think of those moments, and I think of how rare those moments were in my childhood. But I also know, I think too, from him almost saying as much as that he would rather have had more of those experiences. And I think of that as that, hey, is beating a video game or playing something that doesn't, or doing something fruitless, is that worth more than the time I could be spending with people and bettering their lives and impacting them? And you know what? Not every day, if you play 30 minutes to an hour of video games a day, hey, that's your
thing, man.
That's your thing. But it's if you're spending 20 hours a week, essentially doing another part-time job, doing something fruitless, I think that's where we really have to ask yourself, is this right? Or if this is taking away from potential time I could spend with my children, my hairs on this earth. Heirs is
even better.
Heirs
on this earth. That's really cool though too, just you saying that. What if we frame things and is this giving fruit in some part of my life? Because I can see where a lot of people, men, again, don't like to be challenged. What are you saying, Chris? I can't play video games? Never said that. We just said, look at the fruit of what it's producing in your life. And so this is how we're going to close out. So I'm going to thank Chris for his time. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Gordon. I just never thought this would be something that we would do together a few months ago. But I truly think this has been a blessing, not only for me, but just for the people listening to this as well.
I appreciate you being vulnerable. Didn't really expect that story. That was awesome.
Man, well, I try to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, and then so just to be super transparent with you guys. So this was kind of a one-time thing. I told Chris, let's just do this one time, see how it goes. And so we have no plans to do this again. I think probably coming from this, there's some topics we could do again. But literally, I tell you when I say this whole thing was just to bring awareness and have an open discussion on men's mental health.
Absolutely.
And so moving forward from this, man, our hearts are truly that if this impacts one person, man, I think we had a W here. And so, hey, Thanks for listening. We appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate you letting us be authentically vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks for listening to Unmasked.
Thank you.
See ya.